115.
Oh, no, okay, you're gonna wait until,
We don't have 128 on our iPads.
okay.
iPad.
Probably do that. Go to Alan.
We might not have it today.
No, it's under the bill.
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 Yeah.
Yeah, so Ellen Tchaikovsky, Office of Legislative Counsel. So yes, I was here on Thursday on H-128 as introduced. And so I just finished the walkthrough. This is the working lands bill. It has a few, mostly Act 250 related provisions in it.
We are,
There's last Thursday.
yeah. After we ask Ellen any questions we might have about the language of the bill or the maybe implications, then later we're going to have some witnesses coming in later this afternoon to actually talk about a couple of specific pieces, and one of which is soil mitigation. So but we can ask questions about any part of the bill, obviously. David?
I'm just remembering we had a discussion at some point that we came up with a question and we were going to pose it to Ellen now. And I think it had to do with the agroforestry industry.
Okay, that section or?
Yeah, I believe so, but I don't remember exactly what.
No, okay.
I think it was Jed's question, actually. Am I putting it on the spot?
I'm just going to say as a disclaimer that until 5 minutes ago, we were deeply immersed in a different bill entirely.
Yeah.
So it may take a moment for people to readjust.
Can I? Go ahead.
Oh, no, are you sure?
Yeah, I am.
Representative Super.
Okay. Ellen, you had mentioned that you had a concern that an accessory on farm could now be defined as farming. And what are your concerns about that? And if that's the case, can you tell me how that would interplay with an accessory on farm business that doesn't have farming as their primary activity, rather the business, and how that would work with grants through the Agency of Agriculture and how they could be eligible for funding and. Sure. So there's multiple things happening in sections 6 and 7 related to accessory on-farm businesses, which are currently only regulated under municipal zoning, and then moving accessory on-farm businesses to the definition of farming in Act 250. And so in section 7, in the definition of farming under Act 250, this is the definition of farming that's used, that's cross-referenced in many other places in statute. So I can't speak much to Agency of Agriculture grants or any programs like that, but I do know it's cross-referenced to a number of other state programs, including so the endangered species list references farming, the tax scheme, which I don't know a ton about, but they do reference farming and exemptions for farming, as well as municipal zoning. I think I may have mentioned briefly last week that currently under zoning, farming is exempt from zoning already. And so towns can't use their zoning to regulate farming. And so by adding accessory on-farm businesses as part of farming, it's creating a couple of ambiguities that I think could be clarified based on what the intent is, but can cause me even a little confusion, because if an accessory on-farm business is farming, what has to happen on that site? And you're also changing the currently under the definition of accessory on-farm business, it has to be accessory to, which I believe is understood as subordinate to the farming operation, and that phrase has been struck in this draft. And so there is, under this draft, there would not be the requirement that the accessory business be less than or subordinate to the farming operation itself, the traditional farming operation itself. So I think it creates a little bit of confusion about what could actually be happening at these sites with these businesses. And I think the sponsor, and I'm speculating a little bit, is looking to expand the types of businesses, but you might just want to be aware that this definition of farming is used in exemptions for other places. So do you want the activity of selling things, including the selling of merchandise, to be considered farming?
In not just this instance, but possibly another,
Yes.
because it would automatically,
Yes.
yeah, okay.
Oh, and sort of one other trail that I lost in there is, so currently the definition of accessory on-farm business is used in municipal zoning so that towns can't prohibit accessory on-farm businesses in their zoning, and they are allowed to just do site plan review or less if they want, but they can't prohibit them. Towns currently can't prohibit farming. So if an accessory on-farm business under this bill is farming, actually maybe don't need the accessory on-farm business original statute. So I think depending on what your intent, I think I could potentially draft something that would be cleaner and simpler than this, but it feels a little overly complicated and confusing for me to understand all the tendrils on.
So do they have to still be defined as a farmer within the current existing definitions of 10 VSA 6001 to have an accessory on-farm business? Or could they just have a few goats and then have their accessory on-farm business, and that could be what makes them farming? And not the thresholds that are required in the existing definitions?
Potentially. So they do need to be covered by the RAP rules to be an accessory on-farm business. So there is that. But the list of actions that are currently defined as farming, including, cultivation, raising, operation of greenhouse, et cetera, it's adding to that the operation of an accessory on-farm business, which if you're just looking to create an exemption, so effectively that's creating an exemption. But if you're just looking to exempt them, I think I could just draft it a little more discreetly to avoid that confusion.
Representative Templeman.
So going back a few paragraphs, you mentioned that towns can have jurisdiction over specific accessory on-farm business activities and could actually prevent certain accessory on-farm businesses based on those activities.
So currently under the statute, a municipality can't prohibit a business on a farm that meets the definition of an accessory on-farm business. They can review the site plan and require some things under the site plan review, which is traffic, lighting, and signage. Mm-hmm. So, but it's not a full permit review, and they can't prohibit the business if it meets the current definition and statute.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Representative O'Brien.
So what happens right now if Heather has goats, he sells $2,000 a year of goat milk, then starts goat yoga, and that makes $100,000 a year. So it's far, bigger than the farming business. Does that not meet the AOFB standards?
Right, correct. And at that point, it would become likely, this is a hypothetical, would become a commercial enterprise. It would probably then be regulated by potentially both Act 250 and zoning. So the current provision requires that the business be accessory to the farming operation, and that the sale of the product that is, or the event business or the side business is 50% of the total. I think that's what we've been using. So it has to be subordinate to. I'm getting a little caught on my words here, but it has to be subordinate to the farming.
Is net income in what?
I think so. I think so. I'm good at, yeah, I think so. I don't know.
Possibly sales.
So yes, I don't know. I can't remember off the top of my head.
It's interesting, success.
Yeah.
Essentially,
Right, and I know of a number of operations that have made that transition, and so it's not an impossible task, but it does require additional permitting because at that point you are operating like potentially another commercial entity.
Other questions? Representative Templeman.
So just to, you're saying that you could rewrite this with fewer words, more clarity, and we would avoid this confusion between accessory on-farm business and farms.
Yes, if that was your intent. Now, if your intention was that the selling of other products not grown on the farm be part of farming, that is a policy choice you could make. But this, in addition, a couple elements I haven't touched on today is that this is expanding it to the selling of products not grown on that specific farm, but grown on other farms. And it also includes the sale of merchandise. So if you want that to be part of farming, you can make that policy choice, but that policy choice will impact other statutes beyond just Act 250.
You want to have a discussion about that at some point?
Yeah, not now. Well, if we don't have any other questions, we can, but we don't need to keep Ellen unless it's something she might be able to help with.
just one thing I'm unclear about is, would there be standing for, someone to bring suit who has an identical business, but it's just not on a farm? So if we open it up to local food restaurant, this restaurant is on a farm, and this restaurant identical is not on a farm. One's farming, one's not, and so the non-farm restaurant serving all local food has to go through all these hoops, and the farm one doesn't.
But you started that with about a lawsuit? Is that how you were asking?
Well, I was just wondering if, right, it's, in some ways it seems unequal treatment.
So that is the concern that I think this committee has looked at before. It is a policy decision because you are granting sort of an incentive or, some special treatment for these businesses, and there is a policy reason for that. But the broader you make the definitions here, the more tension there might be with other types of similar business. Whether or not they'd have standing to challenge in a lawsuit would be a little bit of a different question. But they probably would express their opinion to you if they were your constituent.
Right. And loophole wise, you could see why if you leased land where the restaurant was and did something that met the very minimum of perhaps, all of a sudden you're a farm, right?
Dave, did you have?
I was wondering, maybe we could also ask about forestry in general. I think it was covered when you reviewed the bill. There's certain accessory forestry businesses such as sawmills, and how does the bill touch on those items?
So not specifically in the accessory on-farm business section.
Okay.
With so currently the definition of farming includes, it does include maple syrup as well as Christmas trees and orchard crops. So not exactly what you're talking about. But the other parts of the bill, not specific to the farming operations, have some forestry implications. So there is an exemption from Act 250 for sawmills and forestry, so smaller sawmills and process.
With you now.
Yep.
Okay, sorry.
Yep. And then there's for mitigation of primary agricultural soils related to wood products manufacturers as well.
There were exemptions up to certain production amounts and.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, sorry.
Yep.
So sections 2 and 3 of the bill, I think, are not related to accessory on farm businesses. And it's actually section 2 that we're going to spend a little time hearing more about from our other witnesses in a few minutes. So maybe it'd be helpful just to go back and look at section 2.
Sure. So section 2 on page 3 is lowering the mitigation ratio for primary agricultural soils under Act 250 for wood products manufacturers. So currently under Act 250, criterion 9B requires someone who's applying for an Act 250 permit needs to prevent the destruction of primary agricultural soils. And if they're going to negatively impact the primary agricultural soils, they need to mitigate that negative impact by preserving more soils than they're going to be destroying elsewhere, either elsewhere on the site or off-site mitigation by paying a fee to Vermont Housing and Conservation Board. And so currently in the statute, it requires either 2-to-1, somewhere between 2-to-1 and 3-to-1 mitigation, meaning either double the amount of site or somewhere between double and triple of the amount of lost soil needs to be conserved. And so this is saying for wood products manufacturers, it's lowering that so that it's a 1-to-1 ratio. So if 1 acre of soil is going to be negatively impacted, 1 acre of soil needs to be protected.
And maybe we talked about this the other day, but is that consistent? And is it a reasonable question to say, is that consistent with something else? The way some things are treated?
So it's a policy question. There are a couple of other instances in the statute where it has been lowered. So it's been lowered for industrial parks and for, I got this wrong last week too, affordable housing. So it's not ubiquitous, but there have been a few choices. There have been a few choices made, and these are policy decisions about. The conversation has come up a few times in the legislature about if different ratios should be used. So
industrial parks, then there's a definition of what constitutes an industrial park as opposed to some other business that's not quite an industrial park.
yes.
Representative O'Brien.
Can prime ag soils be like deep in a forest? I mean, is it just mapped on quality of soil, or is it sort of more traditionally like this was a farm and now we're putting in a Home Depot?
No, I do think, and I'm not the best person to ask, but there is an NRCS map for the whole state. And so I do think it covers not just former agricultural sites, but I don't know that specifically.
Types.
Yeah.
It could be.
Yeah. Additionally, Act 250 criterion 9C does require the protection of productive forest soils as well, but that's a different criterion.
Other questions?
I just had one other sort of off the wall one was the harvesting of wild things like mushrooms, ramps, fiddleheads, ginseng. Are those farming or is that another category? Is it forest? Yeah, but what's that fall under?
It's what we used to do when we were young. Had heat berries,
Yeah.
finding food in the woods.
No, right?
So I am probably not the best person to ask, but within the definition of farming, it does include, so it includes agricultural, horticultural, viticulture, or dairy commodities. It also includes commodities otherwise grown or raised on a farm.
And commodity seems to be the word.
Right, and so I don't know, I think it would come down to the question of if you're, where exactly are you located? Yeah, are you located on a property that is a farm? But I don't know how that's,
And if you sell them, right?
yeah, so I don't actually know.
I just wondered if you sold $2,000 of morel off your property, are you a farmer?
Yeah, I don't really know how the definition of grown there means. I do know that people intentionally raise mushrooms, grow mushrooms,
yeah.
but if they're wild, I don't know. I don't know. Somebody probably does know.
I'll have somebody up in a minute. I'm thinking about leeks,
Right.
yes. Yeah,
It's actually a business for some
Yeah.
people. Ginseng is big.
It was.
the last section, or the second to last section, section 8 of the bill, which is about something, well, it looks like it's about something different, electric generation projects. I think you said when we were walking through that the other day on this also, there's a connection here tying with this, with soil mitigation.
Sure. So I think the sponsor said, so what section 8 would do is that it would bring electric generation above 500 kilowatts into Act 250. And so you would need an Act 250 permit for that. Currently, you need a Section 248 permit, which is called a Certificate of Public Good. And so it sounded like the sponsor was indicating that at least part of her intent was to require the Act 250 criterion related to protection of primary agricultural soils to apply to these electric generation facilities. I will say, though, that Section 248 does incorporate almost all of the Act 250 criteria, including primary agricultural soils. But the reason that many solar panels specifically don't pay the mitigation fee is because there has been a finding that they don't permanently destroy or compromise the soil because they are considered to be temporary fixtures. But any impervious surface like roads or buildings that are constructed associated with those electric generation facilities may actually require primary agricultural soil mitigation. You can maybe ask the Agency of Ag about that as well, because they do participate in those proceedings for electric generation facilities. So if that was the sponsor's only intent, I'm not sure this language necessarily helps. But so from that angle, because Act 250 and 248 have most of the same criteria, it would be a pretty duplicative process.
The section 248 review, so it takes into account primary ag soils, but does it require, and I know you just said solar panels have special, they're treated differently. If it were, say, wind, I guess, would there be a mitigation fee?
Potentially, yeah.
Okay. Okay, yeah.
So solar panels are not considered impervious, no matter what the design, like 80 acres in Shaftesbury.
So I will have to go back and check my notes because that is from case law, I believe. So again, there may be other people in this room who know more about that situation, but I do, if the sponsor's only concern was that, I do think that was a special, that isn't in the statute, I don't think. Actually, I'm going to stop because I think I've already said something incorrect. So I can get more information, but 248 does require looking at primary agricultural soils. I'm going to stop. I think I've already messed up. Someone's going to correct me.
Representative Lipsky.
I'll represent both Brian. If there's a 12 by 12 inch concrete pedestal that went below faucet, supported a 20-foot wide by 12-foot wide southern facing panel, there's really 1 square foot of impervious soil under that system. And if there were 43,000 plus panels, then there would be total an acre of impervious, damage to that by my calculation.
But water hitting a solar panel is not unlike water hitting a roof, right? So those fields that have undulating tidal
Right.
panels, right, seem like it's a very long roof. It's interesting, it's sort of different.
It's also interesting
Yeah,
that
it's,
they're considered temporary.
Right.
I mean, what's permanent?
that they all,
You can rip a building down.
where do you send them when they're?
Oh, that's another question. Different committee. So with that, Ellen, thank you for coming back. And I think that sort of gets us teed up to bring our next witness to the table.
Can I get a glass of water at the front?
Brian, I think